Welcome to Talking About Watches with MrWatchMaster. I'm Andrew Cantor, co-founder and editor-in-chief of MrWatchMaster.com. In these podcasts, we're going to talk to amazing people in the watch world and discover some fascinating facts about them, their collections, and what they love about watches. In this episode, I talked to Jorn Werdelin of Linde Werdelin, a former investment banker who's built the brand over the past 20 years. So we talked about the 20th anniversary and what it means to him and what the future looks like for the brand. So here's what he had to say. Let's just get into a bit of a discussion. So let's start with the first question, which is, where does your interest in watches come from?
So very simply, when I grew up, my father had various sort of high-end retail shops in Denmark selling jewelry and watches, which he took over from my grandfather. I never knew my grandfather because he was dead a long time before I came around. But I was introduced to it by my grandmother and by my father. So I grew up with it, and it was just in a home when someone does something like that, it's just a normal thing. So we had obviously clocks and watches at home, and my father, he collected pocket watches, and back in the sort of 80s, it was a period when we bought gold and silver. The Hunt brothers, they cornered the silver market. I remember that, sitting on Saturdays, cutting up silver and taking away the good parts and so on.
Wow.
So for me, it was, it was just that's what my dad did, and that's what I remember part of my childhood was. And I worked in my dad's shop from when I was, I don't know, maybe 12, 14 years old, starting to engrave engagement rings on the back. We have the machine where you put in the ring and you sit, you do the letters and it engraves around. Batteries in quartz watches. So I wasn't customer facing. I was very much too young for that. And only later, when I grew older, probably when I was 20 years old or something, I help customers also in the shop. So that I think that's how I got the interest, and somehow, and I throughout my life, I think I got into this kind of which really sounds bad, but measuring people on the watch that they were wearing.
Right.
Right. So and this obviously is very much at the forefront the moment with all this talk about people being harassed and
absolutely.
Not to fight for watch, and in when I was a teenager, it was the difference between the people who wore a Rolex and people who wore a Cartier and or something else, but it was quite simple. So that's where I got the interest from.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting you said about your family was in the business. Do you remember some of the brands that you were selling in those days? Was it one of the general stuff or?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Tech, AP, Piaget, Chopard, Cartier.
Right.
Not Omega, but Satina instead.
Okay.
Not Rolex. So when I grew up, I'm actually never owned a Rolex.
Right.
Partly because it was not that was not one of the brands that we had, and
Sure.
my first real watches were the Cartier Santos, the Pasha, the Van Damme, and before that I had the Satina watches. Like some in the 70s, I'm sure that some Swiss people would either agree or disagree with me, but Satina was kind of a competing brand to Omega at that time.
No, I agree.
And obviously it's now it's completely two very different stories, right?
Exactly.
With
Yeah.
Mega being such a dominant brand, and Satina probably forgotten for most people.
Yeah, so a lot of the more jewelry-based watch brands, I guess, in terms of, Cartier and Piaget, and which is interesting. So why did you then want to launch your own watch brand?
So I've worked in investment banking for a good decade in London, and when I was in my mid-30s, I had that feeling that I wanted to do something for myself rather than being an agent, more being a principal. And at that time, I came very often to Denmark, and my good friend Morten Linde, he is a designer and was a designer, and we got this idea of making sports watches with attachable instruments. So, which at that time in 2002 was a very kind of different idea. And the question was, is that really luxury, right? Can you have a watch and can you attach a digital instrument to it? And how is it really done? Can we do it? But back to the idea really came about because I had been skiing in Canada, heli skiing early 2002, and I talked to Morten about that. I had the Jacob Couso, which was another brand we had in my father's shops. So I took my Verso off when I went skiing, and I couldn't leave it anywhere really because I couldn't lock the door in the cabin. And so I had this discussion with Morten about what about a watch that you can keep on all the time, and you got the functionality, but not in the watch, right? And because we knew the T-Touch and digital watches, but there's something about the mechanical and having the electronics interfering with the mechanical our solution was different. Our solution was to say you only have the digital part or the digital performance or functionality only you needed. So that's how the idea came around. And Morten at the same time had been designing a watch for the Danish jeweler Jorn Werdelin, which was a watch for sailing. So that had the same idea about taking an outer case or strap off and change it so that you could have a strap which you could bring on the boat, and then you would have a normal strap which when you were off the boat, so to speak.
Sure, yeah. So it had great functionality as well. Yeah, it was practical in that respect. So
and I think that's part of the Danish culture also. Right? It's sort of function over form.
Form follows function. Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess to some extent it's also our cultural DNA that has impacted how we looked at it.
Okay. So you came up, you had the idea. Well, how did you actually go about doing it?
Day by day. No, but it was so on the 26th of August, and the reason that is the date because it could be any day, right? So, but some years ago we were discussing this. When did we decide to start? And we found, well, it must be the day when we bought lindewerdelin.com, because in 2002, and before we started this, the last thing I did was being part of a technology investment banking startup.
Right.
So I guess I was a little bit sort of tuned into technology. And we bought lindewerdelin.com on the 26th of August 2002.
Right.
That's our birthday. That's the day we sort of But then after that, and Morten he was in Copenhagen and I was in London, and for the first say 3 years when we hadn't really committed to production yet, we were designing, we were developing, we were visiting factories, suppliers in Switzerland, etc., etc. But we hadn't pushed the button on saying, okay, now we pay for producing the hands, the movements, the this, the that, the other. So for the first 3 years, it was like after every summer holiday, we would say, okay, should we continue or not? And obviously we decided to continue, and the same after every Christmas holiday.
Yeah.
So for this first 2 or 3 years, it was very much like I said, almost a day by day. We just sort of plowed on. We did what we did, when it came to it, and I think that was sometime late 2004, early 2005, when we said, okay, now we have it. Now we actually need to go and pay for the parts for producing the pieces. And after that, you're committed to it.
Yeah, exactly. So you're very tenacious. You very much, you believed in it. You had the passion, you had the drive. So I guess really from, what we like to think about is what does the Linde Werdelin brand stand for then? Obviously, you've now got to a stage where you're now producing the watches. What is the brand standing for?
I think what we the essence of what we do is we link back to the two universes of mountains and the sea.
Okay.
And that comes from our combined interest in originally in skiing, in climbing and being in the mountains, and at the same time growing up by the sea.
Yeah.
And also living by the sea, diving, swimming. So for us, it is those two universes that have told us, with the functionality, and then when we kind of took the instruments away because software took over hardware, the design, the construction, and how we think about our watches comes from mountains and the sea, and from nature. And I think that is somewhat different from a lot of other maybe more traditional watch brands that either comes from the orology itself, or from say something with motorsports or space or other that sort of, I guess, reign maybe in the 30s or the 50s and so on. So that's our take. That's what Linde Werdelin stands for. That are universes, and hence the focus on lightweight, the use of materials, the intricate construction of especially the spider lights, which we have skeletonized the case and the movement to reduce weight. And you will see that most of our watches, we use these lightweight materials, 3DTP carbon, ALW, titanium grade 2, titanium grade 5, forged carbon, like ceramics. Well, ceramics not that light, but that's a very hard material, very resistant also. So in that essence, it's a sports watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that you have a clear view on that. I mean, for me, it's about brands that have a very clear vision. Often the most successful brands. I think that's really important.
I think for our clients, tradition and evolution and staying true to our core beliefs, I think they're very important.
Yeah.
I think if you change too much because you are following a route and then you're changing it because, oh no, that didn't really work, now let's change to another.
Exactly.
They get confused.
Yeah, I think it's always best to lead, isn't it, in that respect? So, from your perspective, you talk about your clients, how important are collectors to Linde Werdelin?
I would say aficionados are important to us. Of course, some of our customers are collectors, but I like to describe our clients. It's almost like a community. We personally, so some people say that watches it's just a marketing, and of course there is marketing. You have to tell your story. You have to make yourself known to customers. But we also operate in a very binary world where the big brands occupy the entire space,
Sure.
and smaller brands have almost got no space at all. And I think that's partly why we rely on almost existing customers, word of mouth, getting out to the next. And we can do that because we only deal directly with our clients. So we left wholesale in 2015-16. We left Baselworld in 2016. And that was partly a business decision from the point of view that I could see it was a zero-sum game for us. And it was extremely time-consuming. It was very, very difficult to do it in a sensible fashion. And we saw already in the early days that direct sales and direct communication worked very well for us, and still does. And I it's a little bit also with the tradition is that 20 years in this business is not nothing, and is not an enormous amount of time either.
No, it's solid.
But
it's
I think
solid. It's a solid start.
At least because brands do come and go, and trust me, I understand many reasons why. You're not going to make it through that time. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, where do you see the future of the brand? I mean, what's your sort of long-term view? Obviously, we've had a couple of really challenging years, but what are you seeing now in terms of where you feel the brand is heading?
I feel that we are in a good position because we are in control of our own destiny, even if that sounds very, it sounds very grand. But I feel that we are in control of where we are, and we slowly develop our watches, our families into new. And like you say, we have had a couple of difficult years. I would say it's always either it's great. It is very cyclical, right? That's our industry, and we fortunately were quite well placed when COVID came around because direct we didn't have any wholesale, we didn't have any shops. And we could still communicate with our clients. And a lot of our people are freelancers. So I would say, we almost continued, like we've done before. Our difficult period was actually back in 2015 and 16 when we talk. I mean, Primera comes up now with Putin again, right? Z with anti-corruption. 15, 16, it seems that we have now forgotten, but it was quite a tough few years. And that's when we changed our business so that when in 2020, COVID hit, we sort of continued almost as normal. We try not to grow too quickly, because I remember that from 2010 to 2015, where we grew year on year, I mean, too quickly. And now you say, Jorn, that sounds like a silly problem. Well, it wasn't, because obviously it was great, coming out and more retailers, more watches, and we were running and producing, etc., etc. But it left us extremely exposed when we came to the other side. And there we had all these retailers and all these watches out, and suddenly the world has changed. And we were not selling as much. And obviously you do not want watches to kind of hang there.
Of course.
And now I just feel that if we can grow by 20-30% per year, then we are in control. right? We can continue developing our watches. And for instance, the watch that we are coming out with, a small series just to mark on the 20th anniversary, right, is a 3DTP carbon octopus case in its entirety, which we announced the first two pieces of a couple of months ago. This time around, we have developed a very, very dark matte paint for the dial.
Right.
So, and it just adds another little layer of kind of complexity and what I call holistic, the way that we look at our pieces, that we think about, the case, the lightweight, the structure, the material, the dial, the moons, how they, interact, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're saying what's in the future, I think when you look at us in 5 years' time, we will look a little bit like we do today. I hope also we will introduce some things that are, quite different from what you would normally imagine a watch brand to be. And I can't really say more about that this time. And it was actually supposed to come earlier, but because of COVID, we had to stop production of that for a couple of years. So, but I would very much like to continue in the same tack as we do now, and continue to develop the movements, the materials, the pieces themselves.
I mean, I think that's right. You've got to keep that essence of what you are and who you are, and I think that's absolutely right in terms of And I think it's interesting you were saying that you were growing too quickly, and I think that's you've got to take that learning and you've got to keep that. You've got to manage those issues and keep them and look at and take the positives out of it, which I think is what you've done. So it's really fascinating to hear that, and I think that's really captured the brand, I think, and I hope that you feel the same way in terms of our discussion. It's been great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
To congratulate you on your 20 years, and I wish you luck for the next 20 years. And
we will see each other in another 20 years.
Absolutely. So right, thanks, Jorn.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you
for today. And I'm also very pleased that you got some marine class sitting there, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
On the back.
Absolutely, yeah. It's everything I do. It's a passion. I collect, and I'm very fortunate because I spend a lot of time with a lot of watchmaker, clockmakers, and I also see a lot of great pieces. So I'm very privileged to be in the position I am.
And I think also, our industry has to be full of passion. When things go too much business, and I see some brands, they are sort of struggling just to, make an impact, and they want to be there, they want to be the biggest, and they want to prove something, right? And it's like, no, just don't, right? Because a watch is something we don't need.
Yeah.
And when people go in and they come to us and they spend 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pounds, we have to give them, originality. We have to give them passion. We have to give them a bit of truth. I'm not saying the entire truth, but when I see the opposite, it really, really, I mean, and I shouldn't say it or do it, it just annoys me so much, right? It's like,
I agree.
That's my final comment.
Excellent. Let's leave it there.
Yeah,
lovely. Thanks a lot, Jorn.
All right.
Good to see
nice to see you.
Thank you for listening to Talking About Watches with MrWatchMaster. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. For more information and great stories about watches and the people behind them, please visit www.MrWatchMaster.com. I look forward to hearing from you soon, and hope you enjoy the next podcast, which is coming up. Thank you.